And taking back the mainstream media 3 hours a day, 5 days a week with talk media for the sane among us, those left. Yeah, there's a lot of us left. In fact, the majority of America is sane. This is the thing that makes me so crazy, is when I hear people, particularly in the morning shows of MSNBC, Stephanie Ruhle and these other folks talking about, the far left, you got to worry about the far left. The Democratic Party, if the far left takes over, there's going to be a big problem. Look at the polls, right? This is a poll that was conducted in 2016 by GBA Strategies on behalf of the Progressive Change Institute. It's a serious, solid poll by a reputable polling company. These are positions that Stephanie Ruhle and many of the others on MSNBC, and I have great admiration for her as a reporter and as a former financial person. I mean, she's great, but she's wrong on this. Talking about the far left in the Democratic Party. These are your far left positions and how much support they have in the United States, which would indicate that they're actually centrist positions, not far left positions. Do you want to allow the government to negotiate drug prices? 79% of Americans say yes. Should students get the same low interest rates as big banks? In other words, student loans at 1% or 2% instead of 7 or 9%. 78% of Americans say yes. Should we have universal free pre-kindergarten? 77% of Americans say yes. Should we have fair trade that protects workers, the environment, and jobs rather than this so-called free trade? 75% of Americans say yes. This is of all parties, right? Should we end tax loopholes for corporations that ship jobs overseas? By the way, those loopholes were just expanded with the Republican tax scam. Should we end those loopholes? 74% of Americans say yes. Should we end gerrymandering? 73% of Americans say yes. Should we allow Medicare for all, single-payer health care in the United States? Now, again, the morning shows on MSNBC would characterize that as an extreme left position. 71% of Americans say yes. By the way, every other developed country in the world has already done this. It's not rocket science. Should we disclose corporate spending on politics and lobbying? Transparency. 71% of Americans say yes. Should the NSA be required to get warrants before they spy on us? 71% say yes. Should we spend $400 billion a year, a modest sum, on infrastructure projects? Right? I mean, this is Bernie Sanders. 71% of Americans say yes. Should we have debt-free college at all public universities? 71% of Americans say yes. Stephanie and others, this is not the far left. This is the center of America. Should we expand Social Security benefits? 70% of Americans say yes. Should we have a full employment act? Should the government be the employer of last resort, as Franklin Roosevelt was the last president to do with the WPA and the CCC when capitalism fails, like it did in 2008, and millions of people are thrown out of work, 700,000 people a month after month for a year? Should the government step in and say, if you can't find a job, we will create a job for you? 70% of Americans say yes. Should we retrain coal miners and oil workers for clean energy jobs? In other words, should we be promoting clean energy, wind, solar? 70% of Americans say yes. Should we end tax deductions for fines that Wall Street bankers pay when they rip us off? Did you know that they can deduct that, the fines that they pay? 70% of Americans say yes, of course. This is just common sense. These are all, should we have transparency in trade negotiations? 66% of Americans say yes. Should tipped workers get the full minimum wage? 64% of Americans say yes. Should we eliminate the Electoral College? 65% of Americans say yes. Should community college be free nationwide? 63% of Americans say yes. Should all corporate political spending be required to be approved by shareholders? 66% of Americans say yes. Should you require a special prosecutor in every case that a police officer kills someone? 61% of Americans say yes. Should we guarantee net neutrality? Now, keep in mind, this was 2 years ago this study was done. The support for net neutrality has gone up since then, because back then most people didn't even know what it was. 61% of Americans say yes, guarantee net neutrality. These are not far left positions. This is the center of America. Should we tax the rich at the 50% rate that Ronald Reagan first took taxes to after he dropped them from 74%? Should we tax the rich simply at the 50% rate? 59% of Americans say yes, tax the rich. This is not the far left. Should we have a minimum guaranteed income? 59% of Americans say yes. Should we break up the big banks? 58% of Americans say yes. Should there be public matching funds for small dollar donations? 58% of Americans say yes. Should we break up the big banks? 55% say yes. Should we tax the rich? This was a broader, simply tax the rich, millionaires and billionaires. 54% say yes. Should there be a financial transactions tax to fund many of these things? 50% of Americans say yes. And it goes on from there. This is not the far left. I'm sorry. This is America. We are being so badly served by our media. And frankly, I think it's that, you know, when you reach that level in the media, you know, you're basically hanging out with people. You become a millionaire. You hang out with millionaires, and you know, and what do you see on the morning shows on MSNBC? You know, with great frequency, Republicans and the Democrats that you see typically are the corporate Democrats. You very rarely see actual progressives, even though they're nearly a majority in the Democratic Party, and progressive policies are supported by a majority of Americans, virtually without exception. Please name one progressive policy that more than half of Americans don't support. I can't think of any.